Did you know that in Australia we have a carbon neutral certified petrol and diesel? Not some kind of biofuel made from algae or bamboo or something, no. A conventional petrol and diesel made a fossil fuel, right, that you use to fill up your conventional combustion engine in a car or bike or truck or whatever you drive, right? Now, and all of this, it's legal. It's endorsed by the federal government under its scheme called Climate Active. Now, how is this possible? Isn't this absurd? Isn't this obscene that a fossil fuel can be carbon neutral certified? Well, yes, it is absurd and it is obscene and it's, in my opinion, totally wrong. It's appalling. But to understand how this is even possible, we need to understand how these concepts of net zero and carbon neutral are actually configured, how they are operating, right? And we're gonna look at it in this video because this is a minefield, right? This is crazy. Because did you know that you don't have to be reducing your greenhouse gas emissions, being a country or a company making these pledges net zero and carbon neutral? You don't have to reduce your emissions and still be qualified for net zero and carbon neutral. You could be increasing your greenhouse gas emissions and at the same time be net zero and carbon neutral. And this is crazy. Hi, I'm Jan from sustainablebutterflies.com.au, and on the screen you see my 5 pillars of sustainability. I've got to give credit where it's due, because I am drawing on this report by the Australia Institute called State-Sponsored Greenwash. This report, which is about 60 pages long, gave me lots of ideas, and I am grateful for this report. The Australia Institute is amazing. It's linked in the video description, so have a look if you want to go into details. So before I give you that petrol and diesel example at the end, we need to understand first these concepts of net zero and carbon neutral. Look, I understand that you've probably heard about it, you saw the badge carbon neutral, you have heard the term net zero by 2050 or 2040 made by companies or countries. It's all over the place, it's a big bandwagon now, right? The corporations and countries that are competing, who's going to be sooner or earlier, faster net zero, right? Now, how did these concepts even start? Well, around 2015, around the time of Paris Agreement, 2015, the climate scientists, they realized that we will not reach the target of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, right, by reducing only. It's impossible, they realized. So, if it was possible, we would have just zero by 2050, or by 2030. It would be all about reducing emissions only. But that's impossible, right, in such a short time frame. So they came up with the concept of net zero, which means that, yes, reducing emissions, but the other part, and the net zero concept heavily relies on offsets, which we'll get to in a moment. That other part, you will offset the emissions. So you will increase carbon sinks. You will plant more trees that store that absorb and store carbon. You invest in renewable energy or clean cook stove technology, or reducing landfill gas, methane gas from landfills, or methane from organic waste, etc. Right? So it's this constant balancing act of reducing emissions and increasing carbon sinks. And that's the point of the net zero, right? But because it heavily relies on offsets, this is the biggest problem, right? Because the offsetting part, the offsets part, are only meant to be used as a last resort, right? And only in 2 cases. Number 1, for unavoidable emissions. So, for example, an airline company, big planes flying, currently, today, there is no alternative to that fossil fuel, jet fuel, powering the planes, right? And that means these emissions are unavoidable. But obviously, companies still need to be flying, right? Lufthansa, Qantas, Delta, Virgin, whatever, right? So what they do is they offset these emissions that are released by this jet fuel planes flying all over the world, right? And that's how can claim be net zero, because by offsetting these emissions. So that is in line with that principle, because these emissions are unavoidable. There is currently no commercially viable alternative for that jet fuel. So, but the companies still have to be, stay profitable and viable, so they have to keep flying, right? So that's one. And the second sort of justification for offsets is when for residual emissions. So if the company, exhausted all possible options of reducing, they will use offsets for the remaining part of emissions. So, for example, imagine a Red Rooster, a fast food chain, right? 100 restaurants. What they do is they install solar panels, for example, they plant veggies, they recycle all waste, they divert all organic waste from landfill so it doesn't release methane emissions, they retrofit all the lights for LEDs, they digitize their menus, they don't drive cars to work, right? They ride bicycles or public transport or whatever, and that's how they reduce the 80% of emissions. But they still have about 20% of emissions that they can't get rid of, right? It could be maybe from delivery trucks or from beef, because that's very emission intensive, whatever, right? So what they do for this remaining 20% of emissions, they will offset them. And if they do that, they will be qualified, eligible for net zero and carbon neutral. But what happened, and this is very important, it's like with recycling. It's better than landfill, but it's last resort, right? It's not the solution to waste management. What is the solution to waste management? Reducing waste, right? Obviously. And same as it is with greenhouse gas emissions. The solution is to reduce them, right? But what, and this is where this report by the Australian Institute comes in. What they're saying is that over time, the conventional companies, right, such as Ampol and Santos and Woodside and many other, and even some countries, some Eastern European countries, what they did, they actually realized, well, I don't have to reduce emissions at all, and instead of focusing on that zero part of that net zero, they focused on that net part, right? Which allowed them, and it's all legal and it's legitimate currently under current rules, right? They're not breaking law, they're not dodging it. I don't believe this is greenwash, right? Because they're using the existing framework, right? And what they're doing is, instead of reducing emissions, they are maintaining the status quo and even increase emissions in increasing gas drilling or coal mining or what? Oil drilling, right, etc., and burning fossil fuels, and they just offsetting the emissions that are associated with their activity. And so they focusing on that net part, not the zero part, and this is the biggest danger, because on the face of it, on the front end, if you look at net zero and carbon neutral, it all looks like they're all about reducing emissions and being acting on climate change, and some of them do, right? Some of them are legit, but there are many of those claiming these things who are actually increasing their emissions, and that's what that report demonstrates, showing lots of examples, but by offsetting them, they are still fulfilling that principle of net zero, even though the overall emissions are rising, and this is insane. So now, let me give you that petrol and diesel example. Okay. So now we're going back to that report, state-sponsored greenwash by the Australian Institute, and that's where we see this carbon neutral certified petrol and diesel. Now on the screen you see screenshots from that Climate Active page, which is that Australian federal government scheme called Climate Active, and here is how they justifying, and I'm just giving you the bullet points here, how they are rationalizing this carbon neutral certified petrol, saying this carbon neutral product will offset the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the sourcing, refining, distribution, retailing and consumption of the fuel products. And this is the gist of it, right? Because this is a template, legal template, a legitimate template Not greenwashing, not breaking any laws, not exaggerating or fabricating environmental credentials. This company is playing by the rules, by the federal government scheme, right? Climate Active, it's the scheme. And it's a template for any company that wants to keep releasing the greenhouse gas emissions and also qualify for carbon neutral, right? And present itself as acting on climate change, even though they are certifying the fossil fuel that is the number one driver of climate change, right? Fossil fuels, right? This is totally insane, but it's legit. Unfortunately, that's where we are at. So the way it works in this example and in other examples for different products, right? This is extreme example, is Ampol, that company, they offsetted the emissions associated with retailing and distribution and storing of the petrol products. What that means that they offsetted it, they purchased carbon credits and purchase of these carbon credits financed some sort of carbon sequestration, absorption and storing of greenhouse gases somewhere in the world. And they could have done it, and it's actually detailed in that screenshot, not that screenshot, but from where that screenshot was taken. It could be investing in renewable energy, avoiding or reducing landfill gas, clean cook stove technology, but the most popular carbon credit projects are reforestation, avoided land clearing, and also revegetation projects, right? So Ampol offsetted the emissions from increasing even, and continuing the petrol operations, distribution and refining and drilling and selling and retailing it, right? And they offsetted emissions from this by purchasing carbon credits that finance planting trees, right, somewhere else on the basis of that principle of neutrality, net zero, right? Because the logic there is that these emissions from petrol and diesel will be absorbed by trees planted under this carbon credit and carbon offset, and that's how it fulfills this principle of carbon neutral and net zero, and that's how that company can be legitimately claiming to be carbon neutral certified by federal government climate active scheme, which is bloody disaster, right? Because it means that any company can be continuing to increase their emissions, right, and still be net zero and carbon neutral, and no one's gonna know if they say normal person, if they see federal government endorsed climate active by some company, no one's gonna make that association, in my opinion, at least not now. Maybe they will in 3 years time, but not now. And this is insane, because we could be increasing our greenhouse gas emissions even though we have more net zero and carbon neutral certified companies and products. And this is bloody canary in the minefield. It's obscene and it's absurd and it's appalling, but also it's unsurprising. Anyway, I just wanted to share this with you. Again, have a look in that video description for that report, and you have a great day. Bye.